Hello, hello. Welcome to the InScope podcast. My name is John Scott. I am the CEO of ScopeStack, which is a SAL automation platform for IT services companies. And today I have my hero with me, Kenny Taylor, SE manager over at Cisco. We've worked together for a long time and really want to get, what I think is a unique perspective, not from an IT services company and not from an MSP and not from distribution, but from, Cisco themselves potentially. Right.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here. And sorry that you refer to me as your hero. If I'm your hero, we'll talk later.
I mean, you've let me down a few times, but other than that, it's all been good.
That's right. Good stuff.
Well, again, so, you and I first met when you were the Cisco SE at the hospital where I used to work.
That's right.
And I would always have these kind of crazy ideas like, hey, I want to, do AnyConnect on a firewall. Can you help me do that? I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And so you very graciously helped me out. Yeah,
and you learned real quick that my technical skills only went so far, but I knew the people to go get.
Yeah, you're like, I could Google that too. It's like, I could be an SE.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
But always just, had a ton of respect for you, your technical background, and not even the technical piece as much as I've always looked at Cisco SEs. I hope none of them get a big head, but very well-rounded in terms of technical expertise as well as the ability to talk to people, right? Which and it's always really stood out to me because that's not the same everywhere.
That's right.
Right. And so, is there some special Kool-Aid you feed them or
Well, it's interesting because I do think you hit a good point there because I think what's special about the Cisco SE is obviously the technical abilities that they have, right? But I think it's also the, not just the IQ, but the EQ, right? That emotional side of how they can connect to their customers, they understand their business. And I think if you look at what we're doing right now inside of Cisco, and it's not something that we just started, it's been happening over several years, is this evolution more of from a traditional engineer to an architect, and really with an emphasis around business architecture and business value architecture that's been happening for probably the past 4 or 5 years. And I think that transition is only going to help Cisco to continue to add value to customers.
Yeah, I mean, because we've had, at least I could think of 2 podcast guests now, and it's we're really changing the way we talk about services to our clients. Right. We're talking business outcomes or solutions, right? Because again, the best technician or MSP is one that you don't ever see, right? The one you don't ever have to call because it's up and running, it's handled well. And so I thought what would be a really cool thing to talk about is, the relationship between a VAR and MSP and the SE team, the Cisco team in general. And really I think what we're doing, you could kind of spread across multiple OEMs potentially, right? And so I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of start with my experience with it. Yeah. Which is, so sales, I'm working at a VAR, the sales executive, account executive is working directly with an end client. They're trying to establish that relationship. On the opposite side, potentially, depending on the size of the organization, there's another account executive on the Cisco side also trying to form this relationship, right? And so there's this, well, those 2 sales executives need to work together. Right. And it's the same on the pre-sales side, right? So my account executive is bringing me in and saying, hey, we need to talk technical, talk business outcomes, talk solutions. While on your side, that's your team coming in and doing the same thing, right? And so can you talk to the art of that, kind of the relationship that you're looking to build with the VAR in that account and collectively work together? Yeah,
it's an interesting dynamic because to your point, right? So there's the Cisco account team, right? To your point, right? The account manager and the systems engineer or architect, whatever you want to refer to them as, that they build a business relationship, brother. There's a trust that they build, and then they build that relationship with the customer. And then to your point, right? There's the VAR side of that's looked at as almost kind of a neutral, trusted advisor. Right. And to your point, right, there's the same setup of both account manager and engineer. And it's important for the SE, for both sides, to look at it in 2 ways, I think. From what I did as an SE, what I ask my SEs to do is to establish themselves within the account because
with the end client.
Within the client to establish themselves with their role inside of the account of, I'm going to be your trusted technical advisor from a Cisco standpoint.
Right.
But alongside me is going to be this partner, account SE and AM, but in sense of the SE, this partner account SE who is an extension of me. The two of us are here to support you together, and we're going to support you from the business, from the perspective of the Cisco business. But where this partner adds value is there are things outside of Cisco that may be, solutions integrators that are partners with Cisco that they are going to help us to coordinate.
Right. Yeah. Because and again, like the other kind of interesting part from your side is like there may not be just one VAR trying to have a relationship with that client, right? And
That's
so,
right.
Your team maybe not as much. I don't know the internal workings, but like I know on the Cisco account team, right? Like they're constantly trying to decide like who do I partner with to a certain extent, right? And is your team doing that same thing?
Well, so ideally we want the customer to make that decision, right? We want them we want them to be the ones to say this is the partner that I'm going to work with. But inevitably, what happens, right, is a customer comes to us and says, "I'm looking at this technology, right? I may be looking at cloud technologies.
Yeah.
Give me a partner," right? You always get the question, who's really good at this, right? Who's really good at cloud? Who's really good at collab? And we know who those partners are, right? There's a group of partners that my business partner and I work with that we deem our top 5, right? They're the top 5 partners we do business with in this region, and so with that, we're very intimate with what they can and cannot do. And so when a customer comes to us to say, "I'm looking for a partner with this skill set," we'll make recommendations and say, "Hey, these individuals have done really well for us in the past. They've done really well for our customers in the past. You may or may not be working with them, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, and this is their skill sets. This is what they're capable of doing." And so we'll make those recommendations. And ultimately, like I said, we want the customer to choose who that partner is. But on the other side of that, we will have conversations with the partners to say, here are opportunities, right? The customer doesn't have someone who's doing this, or maybe they do, and they want to look at something a little bit different. And we'll have those conversations. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we try to position the partner to talk with the customer, but the customer makes the decision, ideally.
Yeah. No, that's good. And it's interesting, right? So from like having been on the partner side, trying to both build a relationship with the client, but also build relationships with my peer team, right?
Yeah.
So I would come to you and say, "Hey, Kenny, can I talk to your team?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "No, you've always told me no."
I don't recall that,
but right, like it's got to be a relationship piece that you're building like all the time.
It is.
Like as a partner, you have to invest in, and again, not just the Cisco relationship, right? But you have to invest in that, and like you combine like the level and the time that you need to spend to invest in that with all the other things you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you have not invested the time to build those relationships now and continually, right? Like you're potentially not on that top 5 list. Like you need to be a known entity, right?
That's right. And I'll share with you. I think something that was hurt for us or that gave us a challenge during COVID is we lost that intimacy of the time that we were able to spend with our partners. Because again, I mentioned this kind of top 5 for us. And it is, at the end of the day, it's just the top 5 partners we do business with or that are doing business in our region. And from an engineering perspective, I would encourage and schedule different types of engagements with partners, right? It may just be something as simple as, a happy hour, a lunch or something, that would just get the engineers together to talk, right? They would talk business, talk architecture, what have you. We would also do enablement with our partners, right? So, you may come to me and say, "Hey, I really need to learn more about cloud security or cloud calling." Either one of my engineers or one of my supporting architecture engineers would come in and talk about that. And then likewise, you may tell me something that you're doing in your practice that differentiates you, which then I take and evangelize to my customers to say, "Hey, John told me he's doing this. It sounds really great. I've seen the evidence of what he's doing. I think it's worth talking to him."
Yeah. And I like that. I think that evidence piece is important too, right? Because you need to feel comfortable that if an end customer comes to you and says, "Hey, can you make a recommendation?" You don't want to put them in a bad spot. You don't want to put your team in a bad spot, right? And so like you need to have some level of trust in the capabilities of that, partner.
That's right.
Right. So speaking of capabilities, like if you're looking at, let's say you're looking to engage and kind of build a relationship with a new partner. What are some of the things that judge is probably the wrong word, but like what are some of the criteria that you're like, "Hey, I want to get a feel for how mature they are, if they would be successful working with some of my end customers. Like, are there certain things that you look for?
There are. So a couple of things that I look for, because this happens, right? I have partners come to me a lot that'll say,
because there are more than 5 here.
There are more than
in
5.
Our area.
There are more than 5, right? But what differentiates those is the investments that they're making. I think not just from a Cisco perspective. Obviously, that's probably the first thing that I look at is what are you investing in from a Cisco perspective, right? Not to sound selfish, but that's what I care about.
Yeah.
But outside of that, what are they doing to complete the solution? Because I think what's important,
You mean you can't just sell a Cisco product and it just like fixes all the problems?
This being recorded, because can I
it's
say
not.
that?
You can say whatever you want.
Okay.
It's not recorded.
As much as I'd like to be able to say we deliver 100% of the solution, that's not always true.
Yeah.
Right. There are things, when you get into, especially some specializations, around verticals, for instance, there are some things where we have to have pieces layered on top of that to help us to complete that solution. So I look at what are they investing or where are they investing from a Cisco standpoint, right? Are they specializing? Are they looking at it from the entirety of the architecture so they can deliver multiple layers? But then what are the add-on value pieces that they're going to do to help build onto our solution?
Right.
Those are the partners that I start to look at and I start to invest my time in. And then I start to make the account teams, I start to make the SEs aware of, hey, this is a partner that's really up and coming and you need to really look at what they're doing. And maybe introduce them to your customers. Yeah. And it's a balance. We have to be careful in those situations.
Because again, you want the customer to make that decision.
Because I want the customer to make that decision. That's right.
But like, so what are some of those value add pieces? Like, is it services?
It could be services.
Is it customer success? Yeah. Is it like what is?
Yeah, I think if you look at this transition that Cisco has been in over the past few years as we make a shift to software,
right,
and subscription services are big for us, right? What's a part of that is you have to adopt it if you're going to renew it. And so that's a big thing that we look at with our partners. Are they investing in adoption services? Do they have a practice around that adoption service? Right. And then what is their life cycle in that adoption service to help so that when we get to the point of renewal, it's really not even a conversation of if the customer will renew. It's a matter of are they going to do it for 3 years or 5 years or potentially longer.
Right. And so just to clarify there, to the software selling kind of life cycle piece, right? We sell a client a subscription to something.
Right.
Let's just say it's a year-long subscription, the first, because they're like, I just want to dip my toes in for the first year and kind of see how this goes. They might, to their own abilities, the end customer, they might only use 10% of the features and functions available to them. Yeah. However, a partner could come in and say, hey, you're already paying for this for the next year. You should really look at X. You should look at Y, because these are the things that it will provide to you as a business, and you're already paying for it.
That's right.
Right. So that's the level of like encouraging adoption and getting to know, and like as a partner and MSP, like you need to know your customer's business that you can make those those pieces. And again, a large part of that is customer success. There are all sorts of different names for it now. Life cycle, right?
Adoption services.
Right? And so like that's some of the stuff that you're looking for.
It is.
In a partner.
Some
of the things.
It is. Those are, and I'd say that's probably a big thing right now because again, looking at how customers consume, how they're purchasing, it's changing.
Yeah.
And we realized that several years ago at Cisco, and so now we're in the midst of that transition. And I'd like to say we've got it 100% perfect, and we've perfected this, and we're trucking along. It's a process for us, and so I think coming along with that are our partners who are also in that process of where do I invest and how do I build these practices out for myself.
Yeah, and speak to like the solutioning or actually the services side of it, right? And so whether it's managed services or like one-time project-based services, like because I've always thought of that as like if I was in your shoes, the long pole in the tent, as I call it, is we have an opportunity. We're working with a client, worked with Cisco to define like the bill of materials, get them a quote, got the client that. Like, we can do that pretty quick. Like we've got that down usually. But the services side of like, to your point earlier, like we're talking about a holistic solution. Product alone may not be the only thing you need. You might need to have additional services, whether it's adoption, professional services or whatnot. Like if that's taking a long time, it takes an even longer time for the end customer to like sign the quote. Is that true?
It is. And so to your point, I think a lot of what happens or a lot of the conversations start project-based. And so I'll spare the innocent, and I won't name any names. But when I was an SE, I had a customer that we were doing a security EA for,
Okay.
right? And so the driver of it was based on a project. But what we realized as we dug into it, myself and the partner diving into it a little deeper, that there were opportunity outside of the initial project that we had, right? Okay. So our focus was around the firewall, right? And so we start to realize there's opportunity for endpoint security, there's opportunity for segmentation, et cetera, et cetera. And so we roll all of this into an EA. And so where we made our mistake in that is our focus was on the primary project. We just kind of wrapped it up in this bow called an EA that gave them all this other stuff, but we didn't really think about this.
That's an enterprise agreement, right? For those
enterprise agreement. Okay. That's right. Sorry. Yeah. So an enterprise.
Don't use your lingo here, Kenny.
We are the world of acronyms at Cisco. So we roll it up into this enterprise agreement where we put this pretty bow on it, but our focus remains on the project at hand, right? These others are just sort of the kind of the icing on the cake, right? And so we go into a year of the project or a year of the first year of the EA. And the project wraps up. The initial focus of the project wraps up. Okay, 6 more months goes by. We're 18 months into a 3-year agreement. And I realize they're not consuming the other portion of this, the other components within this enterprise agreement. The likelihood of them renewing is not going to be very high.
If they don't start using it.
If they don't start using it. So I go back to the partner and we start discussing this. And there had been some conversations of doing a proof of concept here or proof of value there. But we really never got any of it off the ground, and so we had to ramp up and do a lot of legwork to get that, get those wheels in motion of just to have them start to do some adoption with these, or at least some testing with these other pieces of the enterprise agreement, to then drive renewal. Yeah. And it was a lot of work. Which had we planned that ahead of time, it would have just been a part of the entire scope of what they were purchasing, not just a single project that we focused on.
Yeah, I mean, the clarity around that scope, right, is extremely important. Like that's what we do.
100%.
No, just kidding. Right, but I feel like there's always this tension of, Cisco wants us to like do all this stuff because they just want to get paid. That's not necessarily it, right? Like I think at the end of the day, we as the VAR, you as the OEM, Cisco, like we all benefit if the customer realizes success. Yeah. Right. They're changing their business. Right. They're like making dramatic improvements because we work together, right? Yeah. Like that's why I think starting with that relationship piece is so important. Yeah. And you need to be educated on what we do just as well as we need to be educated on what's coming down the line that we can then offer to our clients. So. Yeah.
And there was a phrase that I used there. You'll hear POC, proof of concept, POV, proof of value, and I think what we have started to really focus on is the proof of value side of it. Yeah. Because we wanted to get past this idea of it just being a concept because, okay, great, I've got a toy. Yeah. Versus it being an actual product that provides value. Yeah. And so that you'll hear us or hear my SEs kind of say, we're going to do a proof of value so that they get out of this idea of a concept because again, the concept's there, right? We're trying to focus on the value that you're actually getting in the product to your business. Yeah. Not just a nerd knob that I think's cool and I think you should turn on. Right.
So I want to go back to services real quick. Yeah. Because that's what I like talking about.
It could be a focus.
What's your sense of like in the market, top 5 customers or partners that maybe we won't even talk about the top 5 because they may know who they are. No, but like what's your feel for the industry and even let's just call it Southeast right here where we are like in terms of maturity level around services, right? Like and also maybe layer in like the customer success piece. Like are people doing that? Or
they are.
Are you seeing that?
Okay. They are. And when I mentioned my top 5 and it's more so than my top 5 because I look at my top 5 of where my business is because this is where 80 to 90% of my business comes from. Right. And then there's the rest. But I think even getting outside of the top 5 and going on down the stack, they're all investing in that. And I think that goes back to our channels organization where we're making investments in our partners for them to then build those practices inside of their businesses. Within Cisco, obviously you're aware, right? We have our services team, right? We have our CX organization, and there's adoption services, there's lifecycle services that all make up this CX organization outside of just TAC, right? So it's more than just support. It's this lifecycle services team inside of CX. But
is that advanced service? Like, what is advanced?
It is. So advanced services is now a part of CX, customer experience.
Okay.
Another acronym for you. But within that, right? So I focus on the commercial market, right? And you understand the segments within Cisco. So my business is the commercial business, which there are large customers that fall inside that commercial segment. But then there are smaller customers as well.
Yeah.
And when you, I think, look at where services that services model fits in terms of for our customers. It's really in that commercial market, especially when you get kind of into that, we'll just say lower 3/4 of the commercial market. Our partner services make a ton of sense. But even in some of our larger markets or larger customers, global customers, there are partners that provide services there as well. But it's been a continuous investment that we've made in our partner organizations to help in the development of that. Because even as much as we want to use our own services, it's a scale problem, right? When you're a company as big as we are, our services don't necessarily fit, and sometimes we don't even have some of the skill sets that our partners have because they've made such an investment in that delivery or in that ability to deliver services that they can sometimes do things that we can't.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole like channel-led model with Cisco, right? Like y'all have done a stellar job of just enabling the channel and like being channel first type approach. So you mentioned the commercial market, and to me, every time I think about that, I think about speed.
Yeah.
Right. Like deal velocity. Yeah. Like, can you speak to your personal experience with, hey, if we go back to like the long pole in the tent of, services, we could probably get a quote out to a client pretty quick. Commercial market, we can handle the speed and deal velocity, but you start adding in additional services. Like, is that what typically slows things down?
It can. And I don't think it's a bad thing that it does. But it can slow it down because you're getting outside of just pushing out a quote of, hey, this is how much you want to buy costs. Now I have to go and scope out how I'm going to actually deploy this or how we're going to implement this into your environment. And especially again going back to focusing on verticals and the verticalization of some of our solutions. Now I have to tie it into the workflow of your business, and so that means I have to understand the workflow of your business before I can then integrate it into your.
So it's perfectly understandable from your perspective to like not have like breakneck speed in terms of deal velocity, but actually take a minute and like figure out what the client's trying to achieve and like think through that, right? And like, so you're okay with that for the most part.
As long as it doesn't take too long.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I mean, I want to qualify what is too long. Right.
Well, we'll get there in a second. But to your point, I do think, and my business partner and I will use this phrase sometime, that it's okay for us to slow down so that we can then go faster. Because I do think that it's important for us to kind of to pump the brakes a little bit to understand. And I'll tell my SEs this: understand the question behind the question. Right. If a customer comes to you and says, "Hey, I need to add 5 switches in my data center," don't just take for granted that, all right, it's an order for 5 switches in my data center. Why?
Right.
What drove that ask, right? It probably isn't just refresh. If it is, you should have already known about that. If they're asking you to add these switches, there's something in their business that drove that.
Yeah. So you added some additional infrastructure. There's a new business unit.
New application, something's coming online that has this requirement. Understand what that requirement is, because in most instances, what we find is that leads to something else.
Right. Yeah.
And back to your comment earlier on, having the AMSE from Cisco, the AMSE from the partner. A lot of times, our partner knows what that is, and that's the kind of give and take of the relationship of the SE has a give and take with the AM, but then there's the give and take of the Cisco and partner relationship, where the partner sometimes, like I said, knows what's going on. Sometimes the Cisco doesn't, and that I think is something that's unique in the commercial space, because we have some of our modules have so many accounts in them. We may have some modules that have 8 accounts. We may have some modules that have 30 to 35 accounts. And the reality of being able to keep up with 30 to 35 accounts, sometimes it's tough.
Hence more importance around the VAR relationship and the partner 100%. Relationship, right? Because I mean, that's it, right? Like I can think of a number of times where I brought Cisco into a deal because we were having conversations and, maybe we worked on a different opportunity or a different deal together. And so, I think just like that piece, it takes time, right, to build that relationship. And it's not like hey, if I just called you one day and like, hey, Kenny, I'm working with this client, here's a deal. Like, yeah, cool. That's great. But like, let that just be the starting point for continuing to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really interesting. Like, what other things are you looking at out there, like from these partners? What are they doing differently to set themselves apart?
Yeah, I think, going back to what are they investing from a Cisco perspective, that, as I said, I look at that because that's my business, but looking at it beyond that, because I think what's happened, again, referring to COVID, because as I mentioned, right, some of those things we were able to do to build continuity amongst the SEs between the partner Cisco side, kind of it changed with COVID. And I think what else has changed is how and where we work, how and where we store data, how we communicate, et cetera. Those are some of the things that I look at, in what our partners are doing, in the sense of how forward-looking are they? Or are they looking at what Cisco did 2-3 years ago, and that's where they're making their investments? Because if they are, I don't think they're going to be the right partner for us, because they're not innovating. Right. I kind of want them going, skating to where the puck is, per se, versus where it was. And I think also the partners that understand verticals and understand healthcare, understand manufacturing, understand retail.
Well, you don't have to do all of them, right? Like, it's okay to be really good at healthcare.
100%.
Right.
100%. So we have this portion of our channels team that's called DSI, Digital Solutions Integrators. Right.
I love all your acronyms.
I'm going to throw the acronyms out.
Are you required to say a certain number of acronyms on this podcast?
There's a certification.
Okay.
There's a certification that I'll mention later.
Of course there is. Right. Which also has an acronym.
That's right. There's an acronym for that one as well. But so we have our Digital Solutions Integrators. And so these integrators are not partners in the sense of resellers. And so, again, I'm not going to throw out any names, but we have some that specify in just manufacturing. And they're involved not just in, hey, I understand the process of manufacturing. If you're a manufacturer, let's say, here we're here in Greenville, so BMW comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to be building a new plant. These integrators are from dirt to ceiling integrated with understanding the process of manufacturing.
Yeah. That's a different conversation than traditional.
Totally different conversation that I know nothing about, right? I understand the plumbing, right? I don't understand. I'm going to go build a manufacturing facility for you. But they do, right? That's their business. And we work with them because naturally with everything, right, there's something in there, whether it's, the networking, right? The cabling, the wiring, that's going to connect into a Cisco switch, the wireless, whatever, if there's going to be compute, right? You name it, there's going to be things in there that are Cisco built, but they also understand the PLC side of it, right? The project, I'm not going to get into, I'm throwing out other acronyms here, right? But they're going to get into the machine side of it that's actually making the
HMI,
widgets.
human machine. Look at me. I don't know what I'm talking
about. Right. They're going to get into the side of how do I connect the things that are making the widgets for the customer.
Yeah.
And they tie all of that back, into our pieces, but they're helping with building out the manufacturing facility and integrating our pieces into it. And then they partner with our VARs who are actually going to do the reselling of that.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. So it's those individuals, those individuals like that are super specialized. But we have partners that are making investments in just understanding healthcare, for instance.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, being here in Greenville, large healthcare provider that a lot of our partners or several of our partners have made investments in just understanding their business, understanding their partners, who they buy from, who they sell, who they provide services to, et cetera.
Well, and that's like, having worked there, right? Like that's a relationship, a single relationship you could spend all your time on
100%.
Potentially, right? Because of how it's evolving. BMW, another one that I've also worked with very closely before. Like, I used to spend at least 1 or 2 days a week there, just being there and like just being around because there's always things that are coming up in conversations, right? Like, hey, we need to add 10 switches. Well, why? Like, why are you doing that? Oh, I know why, because at lunch we talked about, right? And so it's not just the investment and relationship between the Ciscos of the world, but it's the investment in the relationship just in general, right? Like collaboration and working together on all that stuff.
And going back to what do I look for in partners? So back as an SC, you knew when I was an SC, I focused on healthcare.
Yeah,
that's all I did was healthcare.
Right, and had a cool backpack too. I remember that.
That's right.
Cool backpack. Don't all Cisco SEs have to have a cool backpack?
You have to take a test. It's an acronym test. But and I still have a pretty cool bag. Yeah, right. I've graduated.
I mean, that's a manager bag for sure.
It is, right. There's a point when you that within Cisco that you get as far as you can technical, right?
Got it.
One day they said to me, Kenny, you're as smart as you're going to be as an engineer. We're going to make you a manager.
Yeah.
And here's the
we take your expo markers away.
Right.
And, like, they take it all.
That's right. That's right.
Don't touch a whiteboard, please.
Please.
Whatever you do.
Please. But back when I was technical, when I could think for myself, right, so I only supported healthcare, right? And so something that I thought was super cool about what we did, and this is kind of going back to your, I'm taking a very long path of answering your question around what do I look for in partners, are those partners, again, that not only understand our verticals, but have partnerships with value add pieces to a particular vertical.
Okay.
And so the example I want to give you is I had a healthcare customer. It wasn't you guys. I did have another one that I spent a lot of time with. They had received some pretty low HCAP scores, right? And so this is basically patient satisfaction scores, right? Customers or patients had given them fairly low scores in terms of their overall patient experience and how they felt the treatment and care that they received was for them. A lot of this, what we found, was related to process and to process flow. And in talking with some of the individuals from radiology and some of the individuals from their operating room teams, they invited us to come and do essentially a workflow observation.
So
myself, one of the partner SE, and then one of our Solutions Plus partners joined us. Right. I didn't get paid on the Solutions Plus partner. The partner did. Right. They could resell their services.
Interesting.
But the partner was able to say, hey, they focus on workflow improvement, operations improvement. And so we sat for 2 days. I was there one day. We had another person there another day. For 2 days, just kind of watching and observing.
Yeah.
And so that's
interesting.
And so from that, right, we made recommendations. Obviously, there were Cisco pieces to that. There were recommendations, and then this Solutions Plus partner made their recommendation. We also recommended a competitive solution. And the customer said to us, "I can't believe that you're actually recommending a competitive solution to us." But when we explained to them that it was not so much about me getting paid and selling you the Cisco solution, it's about this is what's going to add the most value to your business. That changed our relationship. That changed the relationship from a Cisco perspective. It changed the relationship from the partner perspective. And it helped us then become, what everybody seeks is that kind of trusted advisor, if you will.
That's the gold status, right?
To then, go and build upon that for future business.
Yeah. Well, and just know what you're good at, right? Like if I came and I said, hey, I'm a partner, we do everything.
Yeah.
Awesome, right? Like you've been doing this long enough and your SEs have been doing this long enough where they can see pretty much right through that.
They can see through it. Yep.
However, if you say, I'm really good at this one thing, bring it to me and I'll crush it all day long. Like there's probably more value in that than there is. I know there is more value in that than me saying I do everything, 100%.
Yeah. And I have had, engineering leaders within partners come to me and ask, hey, what do you think we do really well? We're trying to.
That's cool. Yeah.
We're trying to get, kind of this next phase in our business. And I've made exactly what you just said, the comment to them of, do this really well, right? You guys have focused on this, but get to the point where you do it really well, and then maybe tackle the next thing. And I've made comments to partners before where I think you've lost your identity a bit, where you did this really well, and that you kind of spread yourself a little too thin, and maybe you're not doing what you did so well previously as well now.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other show in itself, probably.
That's another episode.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll come back.
Well, so I want to get like your feedback, your advice on like what is one thing or two things that a partner can do to kind of set themselves apart or really, let's just start there. Yeah. That can set themselves apart.
So, we've talked about adoption and having that plan of adoption whenever you're doing, a project, right? Especially when an enterprise agreement is coming into play. Yeah. I don't think that there is ever a time where it's too early to start that conversation.
Yeah.
I gave the example of my own experience, very early on when Cisco started doing enterprise agreements, of realizing 18 months in, we're in a bad place.
Yeah.
So now, when I'm talking with or coaching my team, or they're asking for advice on something, related to, where an enterprise agreement may be a part of the opportunity, one of my first questions is, what's the plan of adoption for this?
Yeah.
Right. So, again, if you're talking about one piece of it, we're missing it.
Right.
We have to broaden the conversation, and that's where it's extremely important for us to be tied to our partner in there, because I don't want my SEs delivering services, right?
Yeah.
As technical as they are, they're not. Cisco's portfolio is so large now, the SEs can't be the hands-on keyboard anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Some of them are, just because they've been around a long time and they're super wicked smart individuals.
Yeah.
But our portfolio has gotten so big that there are just components that we can't dive under the hood like we used to anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important to start to have those conversations around adoption in the beginning. If you wait until you've got a purchase order, I think you've missed it.
Yeah.
It has to be in the beginning of planning stages.
So I was actually talking to someone on the CX team a while back, right? And they were like, "Hey, we see you can do statement of work automation.
Yeah.
Can you automate customer success plans?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Well, tell me kind of what's all involved." And we eventually distilled it down to like business outcomes, KPIs associated each one of those, and it's what's ongoing adoption strategy, and then like what are your barriers, right, to adoption?
Right.
Like it's really not overly complicated, but it does take a conversation, to your point, with the client up front to really have a clear understanding of what that is. And we were like, hey, it'd be great if we could build something that could do that. Unfortunately, we didn't feel like we could just build something for a specific Cisco program, but we were like, we think having that kind of thought process and even a spot in like UI to build all that as it relates to my services is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like that needs to be a part of your thought process as an SE on the partner side as you're scoping out a project.
Sure. 100%.
Right. Like what are we trying to achieve here? And so just getting that up front.
Right.
So that's cool. Well, look, man, again, we could probably sit here and talk all day long.
I've got nowhere else to be.
About the things we used to do at the hospital that we shouldn't talk about.
That's right. We should record those.
We'll talk about those later.
Yeah.
On a out of scope podcast. Maybe we can call it that. That'd be cool.
That.
Yeah. I know people know who and what Cisco is, but like your team, like how can people reach out if they want to start building that relationship?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach me. We didn't talk about this early on, but so I focus on the Carolinas. Right, I have the commercial business here in the Carolinas. I have a business partner that's on the sales side that he and I are partnered up with. Happy to connect with anyone. Like I said, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to hit me up. kenite@cisco.com.
Kenite. Love it.
It's right. It's been that way since the beginning.
It has. Yeah. Yes, it has.
But happy to connect with anyone, as I said, supporting the business here across the Carolinas for the commercial segment.
Yeah, and I'd say like, if you're not sure if you're one of those top 5, like start investing in the relationship. 100%. Start somewhere.
Yeah.
You don't have to bring donuts to Kenny's house all the time. I only had to do it like once a week, I think is what you made me do. So, there's
You see how far that got you.
Yeah, not very far.
So it'll be twice a week.
Twice a week.
Number.
I'll give you Kenny's address later.
Yeah.
If I can find it. But I really appreciate it, man. Again,
I appreciate you inviting me.
Like just having that perspective of, maybe a conversation that someone couldn't ask you, right? Because there's always politics and there's stuff. You've always been great to work with and, been very honest in feedback.
Sometimes you have to be careful how honest you are.
Yes.
Sometimes it isn't what you say, it's how you say it.
There you go. Look at you. But again, thank you for being here.
I appreciate you inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, for those of you, please subscribe to the InScope podcast. You can find it at scopestack.io/podcast. Again, we have a bunch of really good services leaders, OEM leaders, distribution will be on here. And so some pretty unique perspective we feel like we're bringing. So again, thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.